everyone. Love this.
July 22nd, 2025, the day the music died. Ozzy Osbourne, the immortal Prince of Darkness, the man who transformed heavy metal from underground rebellion into a worldwide religion, collapsed at his Buckinghamshire home. Cardiac arrest at 76. The news hit like a freight train, and suddenly, the world that Ozzy had soundtracked for 5 decades went silent. Social media exploded with grief. Tributes poured in from every corner of the globe. Rock legends bowed their heads. Fans who had grown up headbanging to Paranoid and Crazy Train wept openly. Memorial concerts were organized almost immediately. The greatest musicians alive, from Metallica's Robert Trujillo to members of Guns N' Roses, from Tool's Maynard James Keenan to Wolfgang Van Halen, from Chad Smith to Billy Idol and Steve Stevens, gathered to honor the man who had given them all a blueprint for rebellion. Zakk Wylde, Ozzy's longtime guitarist, performed with tears streaming down his face. These weren't just tribute performances. They were acts of love from musicians who understood that without Ozzy Osbourne, the landscape of rock music would be unrecognizable. Birmingham, the gritty English city where Black Sabbath was born in dingy pubs and working-class desperation, became a pilgrimage site overnight. Thousands flooded the streets, holding candles, wearing black, sharing memories of the legend who put their city on the map. The industrial town that had given birth to heavy metal was now mourning its greatest son. Fans traveled from across Europe just to stand on the same streets where young John Michael Osbourne had once walked, dreaming of escape through music. But amid this tsunami of mourning, amid the endless stream of interviews and remembrances and televised tributes, one voice remained conspicuously, painfully absent: Sharon Osbourne. The woman who had been Ozzy's wife for over 4 decades. The woman who had saved his life more times than anyone could count. The woman who had transformed a self-destructive addict into a global icon. The fierce manager who had resurrected his career when everyone had written him off as finished. The creator of Ozzfest, the festival that became the biggest metal touring event in history. The warrior who had stood by Ozzy through addiction, through Parkinson's disease, through countless surgeries and health crises that would have destroyed lesser relationships. Sharon, who had always been the loudest voice in any room, the most protective force in Ozzy's universe, was suddenly, devastatingly silent. Days turned into weeks. No statements, no interviews, no appearances on the talk shows where she had been a fixture for years. The woman who had shared her life with Ozzy on reality television, who had never shied away from cameras or controversy, who had built a media career on being brutally honest and refreshingly unfiltered, had vanished behind a wall of grief. At Ozzy's funeral in Birmingham on July 30th, Sharon appeared briefly, frail and broken. Cameras caught glimpses of her bowed head as she and her children raised their arms in the peace sign, acknowledging the thousands who had gathered to pay respects. But she spoke no words, gave no interviews, made no public addresses. Her children became her voice in those dark days. Jack Osbourne, visibly devastated, thanked fans for their overwhelming support and shared beautiful memories of his father. He talked about how Ozzy wasn't just his dad, but his colleague, his housemate when Jack was between places in his late 30s, his texting buddy, his friend who cracked jokes at all hours. He described Ozzy as deeply complicated, funny, weird, awkward, clumsy, hilarious, and profoundly insightful. A father who gave him everything that truly mattered, far beyond the material trappings of rock stardom. Jack spoke of working with his father in multiple capacities, of the unique privilege of having Ozzy Osbourne not just as a parent, but as a genuine friend and companion. Kelly Osbourne broke down describing her father's death as the most devastating moment of her existence. The pain in her voice was raw and unfiltered, stripped of any performance or pretense. These public displays of grief from Ozzy's children only amplified the haunting nature of Sharon's silence. Fans began to worry. Was she too shattered to speak? Had the loss of her soulmate, her partner through decades of chaos and triumph, finally broken the unbreakable Sharon Osbourne, the woman who had survived colon cancer? Public betrayals from Ozzy's infidelities, brutal humiliation on live television, and the relentless cruelty of the music industry seemed to have finally met, something she couldn't fight through. With her trademark fire and defiance, speculation intensified across social media and entertainment news. Some wondered if she was protecting herself from the media circus that would inevitably surround any statement she made. Others worried she was spiraling into a depression so deep that words had become impossible. Sharon, who had always been Ozzy's fiercest defender, who had once famously joked that when Ozzy told her he thought he was dying, she responded with "Die quietly, I have an appointment at 9 o'clock," was now the one who seemed to be drowning. Her silence became its own narrative, a grief so profound that it swallowed language itself. Entertainment journalists wrote entire articles analyzing what her absence meant. Fans created tribute videos dedicated to Sharon, thanking her for everything she had done for Ozzy and for them. The woman who had always controlled the narrative was now the subject of worried speculation, and she wasn't there to set the record straight. Then September 12th arrived. Almost 2 months after Ozzy's death. 2 months of silence that had felt like an eternity to fans who had grown to love Sharon almost as much as they loved Ozzy. And finally, Sharon broke that silence, not with a press conference surrounded by publicists and carefully crafted corporate messaging, not on a talk show with bright lights and sympathetic hosts lobbing softball questions, not through her usual platforms where she had built a reputation for being brutally honest and refreshingly unfiltered. Instead, Sharon chose Instagram, a simple post, personal, intimate, unmediated. Her words, though written rather than spoken, carried the crushing weight of months of accumulated grief. "I'm still having trouble finding the words to express how grateful I am for the overwhelming love and support you've shown on social media," she wrote. "Your comments, posts, and tributes have brought me more comfort than you know. None of it has gone unnoticed. In fact, it's carried me through many nights. Those words, 'it carried me through many nights,' hit like a sledgehammer." This was Sharon Osbourne, the woman who had survived everything, admitting that she was barely surviving now. The woman who had built an empire, who had fought record executives and critics and anyone who dared underestimate Ozzy, was confessing that she was being held together by the kindness of strangers on the internet. She was revealing a vulnerability that felt almost unbearable in its honesty. Fans had carried her through. Their tributes, their stories, their digital expressions of love had become her lifeline in the suffocating darkness of widowhood. This wasn't the Sharon the world thought they knew. This wasn't the firecracker who could destroy someone with a perfectly timed insult. This wasn't the manager who could intimidate industry veterans twice her size. This was a widow, shattered and desperate, clinging to whatever threads of love she could find. But Sharon's statement didn't end there. She did something unexpected, something that would prove to be deeply symbolic. She shared a video from her visit to Cornwall Falconry in England, where she and Kelly had spent an afternoon with owls and falcons. At first glance, it seemed like an odd choice. Why share footage of birds when the world was waiting to hear about Ozzy? But Sharon, as always, was thinking several layers deeper. "Though I'm still finding my footing," she explained, "I wanted to share some glorious creatures I had the chance to spend an afternoon with. The connection you make with these powerful birds is built entirely on trust and confidence. They'll choose to perch on you only if they sense you are safe and unafraid of them. It's a bond I know all too well, and the experience was nothing short of magical." The metaphor crashed over fans like a wave. These birds, magnificent and powerful yet fragile and cautious, would only trust someone who made them feel safe. Sharon, who had spent over 40 years building trust with a man who was chaos incarnate, understood that bond more intimately than perhaps anyone alive. Ozzy had been unpredictable, self-destructive, loving, hilarious, and heartbreaking, often all in the same day. He had struggled with addiction for decades. He had cheated on Sharon, nearly destroying their marriage. He had battled health issues that would have killed most people, yet Sharon had built a life with him. She had trusted him even when he couldn't trust himself. She had fought for him through addiction and illness and the thousand small disasters that defined life with a rock legend. She had loved him until his final breath, through every high and devastating low. Now, standing with these powerful birds of prey, Sharon was telling the world something profound about her current state. She was saying that trust and safety are what she needs most right now. That grief has made her fragile in ways she never imagined possible. That she is trying, desperately, to rebuild herself in the aftermath of losing her everything. Owls carry deep symbolism across cultures. They are creatures of darkness who thrive in shadows, who see what others cannot. They represent wisdom, endurance, transition, and even death itself. In many traditions, owls are messengers between worlds, guides for souls transitioning from life to death. Sharon, standing with these nocturnal hunters, wasn't just talking about trust. She was acknowledging that she, like these owls, was learning to navigate darkness, Ozzy. The Prince of Darkness had lived his entire life in shadows, had made darkness beautiful and powerful and transcendent through his music. Songs like Black Sabbath, Paranoid, and War Pigs had taken the darkness of industrial Birmingham and transformed it into art. Now, Sharon, stripped of her partner, was learning how to see through that darkness alone, how to find her way without the man who had been her North Star for decades. Her message concluded with words that broke hearts across the world. I love you all, and I thank you deeply for the otherworldly amount of love you continue to send my way. It wasn't just gratitude. It was an admission of desperate need. She was telling millions of people that she couldn't carry this weight alone, that their love had literally become her oxygen in the suffocating silence of widowhood, that without their support, she might not make it through. The reaction was instantaneous and overwhelming. The post went viral within hours. Her comment section flooded with messages of love and support from around the world. We're here for you, Sharon. Thank you for sharing him with us. Stay strong. You're not alone. Your love story inspired us all. Fans shared their own stories of loss, creating a community of grief and support around Sharon's post. Fellow musicians who had known both Ozzy and Sharon for decades sent private and public messages of support. Rob Halford from Judas Priest, who had spoken movingly about Ozzy's final concert in Birmingham, sent words of love and solidarity. Tony Iommi, Ozzy's bandmate from Black Sabbath, reached out privately. Musicians from every generation of metal and rock reminded Sharon that she was as much a part of Ozzy's legacy as his music. That without her, there might not have been an Ozzy Osbourne at all. At least not the version the world came to love, and they were absolutely right. Sharon's silence and then her breaking of it reminded everyone of who she truly was in this story. Sharon Osbourne wasn't just the widow of a rock legend. She was the architect of his second life, the engineer of his resurrection, the force that transformed a damaged man into an enduring icon. When Black Sabbath imploded in the early 80s, when Ozzy descended into addiction so severe that many wrote him off as finished, it was Sharon who pulled him from the abyss. The daughter of legendary music manager Don Arden, Sharon had grown up in the brutal world of the music industry. She knew how it worked, knew how to fight, knew how to win. She pushed Ozzy to launch a solo career when everyone said he was done, when record labels refused to touch him, when his own band had fired him for being too unreliable. She fought with record executives who didn't believe in him. She assembled the musicians who would become his legendary solo band. She masterminded the Blizzard of Oz album, which would become one of the greatest metal albums of all time. She created Ozfest in the 90s, transforming it into the most successful touring metal festival in history, giving a platform to countless bands while cementing Ozzy's status as the godfather of heavy metal. She turned the Prince of Darkness into a global brand, a cultural icon who transcended music. And then, in a stroke of genius, she brought Ozzy into millions of homes through the Osbournes reality show, revealing his humanity, his humor, his struggles, and his family to an audience who had never listened to metal. The show made Ozzy beloved by people who had once feared or dismissed him. Sharon was the force behind everything. She was the warrior who protected him from himself and from an industry that would have chewed him up and spit him out. She was the manager who made brilliant business decisions that kept Ozzy relevant across 5 decades. She was the wife who nursed him through Parkinson's disease and countless health scares. She was the mother who raised their children while managing one of the most chaotic careers in entertainment history. And now, stripped of the man who had been her purpose for so long, she was revealing herself as simply a woman in profound pain. The timing of her statement, nearly 2 months after Ozzy's death, was significant. Sharon had needed that time. Time to process the impossible. Time to figure out how to breathe in a world without Ozzy. Time to find words for grief that felt beyond language. What makes Sharon's statement so powerful is its combination of vulnerability and strength. She didn't pretend to be okay. She didn't put on a brave face and deliver platitudes about healing and moving forward. She admitted she was struggling, that she was being held together by the kindness of strangers, that she was fragile and rebuilding slowly. But she also showed up. She posted. She shared. She let people in. That takes enormous courage, especially for someone who has spent decades being strong for everyone else. Sharon Osbourne's first public words after Ozzy's death will break your heart because they're so honest, so raw, so human. They remind us that behind the celebrity and the legend and the reality television persona is a woman who loved her husband deeply and is now navigating the most painful chapter of her life. Sharon Osbourne's silence was devastating. But her breaking of that silence, with all its vulnerability and symbolism and painful honesty, might be even more powerful. It's a reminder that love survives death, that grief is the price we pay for loving deeply, and that even in our darkest moments, human connection can be the light that guides us through. Sharon is still here, still fighting, still finding her way forward, one fragile step at a time.